Excuse me. Sorry, continuing with, the passage analysis. We're picking up with passage 15. So the nurse put together this plan. She went to go see the friar who was hiding Romeo. And they came up with this plan, given that Romeo was banished, for him to spend one last night with Juliet. So they figure out a way. He tells her to ascend her chamber, but don't stay too late, because if you do, technically he's not supposed to be there. Obviously he's going to get into a lot of trouble. So he ends up spending the night there, and this next passage takes place in the next morning, where Juliet says, Art thou gone, so loved Lord? Aye, husband, friend, I must hear from thee every day in the hour, for in a minute there are many days. Oh, by this count, I shall be much in years ere I again behold my Romeo. And, they're saying their goodbyes. This is that morning where they're leaving. And she's saying that, she must hear from Romeo at all times, because every minute that passes feels as if it's a day. So keep in mind, she was sad about Tybalt's death. It doesn't seem like she's too sad anymore, and she's able to forgive Romeo, where that conflicting feelings that she had, it seems like she's siding with Romeo now. And Romeo says, Farewell, I will admit no opportunity that may convey my greetings love to thee. Oh, thinkest thou we shall ever meet again? I doubt it not, and all these woes shall serve for sweet discourses in our time to come. So now Romeo lowers himself, because Juliet's room, let's say, for example, is on the second floor. So he's down low, as he's escaping, as he's leaving. And Juliet says something that's interesting as she looks down upon him. O God, I have an ill-divining soul. Methinks I see thee now. Thou art so low as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. Either my eyesight fails, or thou lookest pale. Which, in a weird way, she's kind of saying, from up here, you look like you're in a tomb, and you look pale like you're dead. Which is some not-so-subtle foreshadowing. Now, her parents end up coming in, and it's an interesting exchange that takes place between the two of them, where Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother, says, Evermore weeping for your cousin's death? What, wilt thou wash him from his grave with tears? And if thou couldst not make him live? Therefore have done. Some grief shows much of love, but much of grief shows still some want of wit. And she's kind of, for lack of a better term, being insensitive. When she sees Juliet is crying, and she's like, you're still crying over his death? What, do you think crying's going to bring him back? Keep in mind, he just died the previous day, so I think it would make sense and be a total reasonable response for Juliet to be crying. And she says, let me weep for such a feeling loss. Well, girl, you thou weepest not so much for his death as that villain lives which slaughtered him. God pardon him, I do with all my heart, and yet no man like he doth grieve my heart. Indeed, I shall never be satisfied with Romeo till I behold him dead. Is my poor heart for a kinsman vexed? Madam, if you could find out but a man to bear a poison, I would temper it, that Romeo should, upon receipt thereof, soon sleep in quiet. So there's a little bit of acting here, where Lady Capulet's like, the guy who did this is still out there, and Juliet kind of has to pretend where she's like, I'll never be satisfied until he's dead. And again, more foreshadowing, she hints at death by poison. Now, Lady Capulet thinks that she has some news that could potentially cheer up Juliet, and it's coming from her father. She says, Well, thou hast a careful father, child, one who, to put thee from thy heaviness, hath sorted out a sudden day of joy, that thou expectest not, nor I looked not for. And Juliet gets excited, what has he set up? Madam, in happy time, what day is that? And she says, Marry, my child, early next Thursday morn. The gallant young and noble gentleman, the county Paris at St. Peter's Church, shall happily make thee there a joyful bride. So the day that her father has set up is for her to marry Paris, pretty much in a couple of days, on Thursday. And Juliet isn't appreciative of these news. Now by St. Peter's Church and Peter too, he shall not make me there a joyful bride. And Juliet's father walks in, Lord Capulet, and says, When the sun sets, the air doth drizzle dew, but for the sunset of my brother's son it rains downright. How now, a conduit girl? What, still in tears? And he basically kind of has a similar response to Juliet's mom, where it's like, in a conduit's a fountain, like, what are you, a fountain? You're still crying? So same thing. No one's really being sensitive to the fact that Juliet may be sad that her cousin just died. And Lady Capulet says, "Aye, sir, but she will none, she gives you thanks. I would the fool were married to her grave. Soft, take me with you, wife. How will she none? Doth she not give us thanks? Is she not proud? Doth she not count her blessed?" And Juliet says, "Not proud that you have, but thankful that you have." Fie, what are you, mad? And they're talking about how they think Juliet should feel blessed that, her father has done this for her. That she should be thankful that her father has done this, but she isn't. And Juliet says, "Good father, I beseech you on my knees, hear me with patience, but to speak a word." And she's begging for her father to listen to her, and hear her out, where if he would just listen, he would know that this isn't what she really wants. But, the father says, in my opinion, probably one of the most intense lines of the entire play. He says, "Hang thee, young baggage, you disobedient wretch. I'll tell thee what. Get thee to church on Thursday, or never look me in the face. Speak not, reply not, do not answer me. My fingers itch. Wife, we scarce thought us blessed that God had lent us but this only child. But now I see this one is one too much, and that we have a curse in having her. Out on her, Hilding." Which he kind of goes off on Juliet. He calls her a disobedient wretch and basically says, if you don't get to that church on Thursday, never look me in the face again. Say nothing, and I thought we were blessed by having this only child, but it turns out we had one too much, and we had a curse in having her. So some pretty hurtful things to say. And obviously, Juliet feels upset about this, and she leaves, leaving behind just the nurse and Juliet behind, to which the nurse kind of has a compromise. She says, "Romeo is banished in all the world to nothing that he dares never come back to challenge you. Or if he do, it needs must be by stealth. Then, since the case so stands as now it doth, I think it best you married with the county. He's a lovely gentleman. Romeo is a dishclout to him. An eagle, madam, hath not so green, so quick, so fair an eye, as Paris hath. Be true my very heart, I think you are happy in this second match." So, the nurse is saying, given the situation where we stand with Romeo being banished, the only way you guys could be together is if it be by stealth, which potentially isn't worth it, which maybe you're happier in this second match. So the nurse is suggesting that maybe she should, just go along and marry Paris, to which Juliet isn't really keen on that idea. "Ancient damnation, O most wicked fiend, is it more sin to wish me thus forsworn, or to dispraise my lord with that same tongue which she hath praised him with above compare so many thousand times? Go, counselor, thou and my bosom henceforth shall be twain. I'll to the friar to know his remedy. If all else fail, myself have power to die." And it's interesting. She calls her, "Oh, most wicked fiend." And it's how quick she turns on her nurse, which is interesting because the nurse has really been the one that has been there for Juliet. But in this moment, Juliet doesn't appreciate her making the suggestion of marrying Paris. And, she's confused because she says, before you used to praise him, but now you're dispraising him. So you're kind of contradicting yourself, nurse. And she says she's going to go off to the friar to see if he has something that he can do. And if not, that she would rather die. If all else fails, she'll kill herself. She's willing to go that far than to marry Paris. And the next scene picks up at the church, where Paris is talking to Friar Lawrence about this upcoming marriage. And he's talking to him about Juliet. He says, "Immoderately she weeps for Tybalt's death, and therefore have I talked little of love, for Venus smiles not in a house of tears. Now, sir, her father counts it dangerous that she do give her sorrows so much sway, and isn't his wisdom haste our marriage to stop the inundation of her tears, which too much minded by herself alone may be put from her by society. Now, do you know the reason of this haste? Now, in this passage, Paris kind of seems like an all-right guy, because we're kind of set up to think of Paris as kind of the villain, almost, but he's saying, he hasn't really talked a lot of love with Juliet. He's kind of given her some space, because Venus smiles not in a house of tears, and Venus is a goddess that represents love, so he hasn't really brought up this idea of love a whole lot, because Juliet doesn't seem to be ready for it. But the father's the one who pushes this along, because he thinks that if he hastens this marriage, speeds it up, it'll stop her tears. Which Juliet's this young girl, she's 14, like, what could possibly go wrong with, pressuring her into this marriage that she doesn't want? Exactly, which that's what her father's doing. Now, Juliet enters, and Paris greets her by saying, happily met, my lady and my wife. And that may be, sir, when I may be a wife. Now, it's interesting here that Juliet says, not your wife, she says a wife, because she already is a wife, but she doesn't quite feel like it. And that's because, she hasn't been able to enjoy being a wife or, do what a wife does, because she's been dealing with all this extra nonsense that's taking place and trying to figure out how her and Romeo can be together. And she uses the excuse of she's come to make a confession to get Paris to leave. And as soon as Paris does leave, she kind of breaks down. Oh, shut the door, and when thou hast done so, come weep with me, past hope, past cure, past help. So she feels hopeless, like there's nothing they can do. And, like we said before, she's willing to kill herself, and she tells that to the friar. But the friar thinks that, maybe there is some hope left. And he says, hold, daughter, I do spy a kind of hope, which craves as desperate an execution as that is desperate which we would prevent. If, rather than to marry County Paris, thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself, then is it likely that thou wilt undertake a thing like death to chide away this shame. Thou copest with death himself to scape it from it. And if thou darest, I'll give thee remedy. Basically saying, before you freak out, before go and do something rash, I have a plan. And he goes through in this lengthy passage here to explain what that plan is. Hold then, go home, be merry. Give consent to marry Paris. Say, pretty much you're gonna marry Paris. Wednesday is tomorrow. Tomorrow night look that thou lie alone. Let not the nurse lie with thee in thy chamber. And he shows her a vial. And he's making sure, tomorrow night you're by yourself. No one is with you when you go to bed. In this vial, he says, take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilled liquor drink thou off, when presently through all thy veins shall run a cold and drowsy humor, for no pulse shall keep this native progress, but surcease. No warmth, no breath shall testify thou livest. So this drink in this vial that she will drink is going to make her appear to have no warmth, no breath, no pulse, essentially making her look dead. The roses in thy lips and cheeks shall fade to paly ashes. Thy eyes' windows fall like death when he shuts up the day of life. Each part, deprived of supple government, shall stiff and stark and cold appear like death. So, her appearance is going to fade. The rosiness in her lips and her cheeks is going to go away. Her eyes are going to shut. She is going to appear to be dead. And in this broad likeness of shrunk death thou shalt continue 42 hours. For 42 hours she will look this way. And then awake as from a pleasant sleep. She's going to wake up like nothing happened. Now, when the bridegroom in the morning comes to rouse thee from thy bed, thereout thou dead. And then as the manner of our country is in thy best robes uncovered in their bier, thou shalt be borne to that same ancient vault where all the kindred of the Capulets lie. In the meantime, against thou shalt awake, shall Romeo by my letters know our drift, and hither shall he come, and he and I will watch thee waking, and that very night shall Romeo bear thee hence to Mantua. So basically, the plan is, For her to drink this potion that's going to make her appear dead, everyone's going to think she's dead, and, while people are falling for this, the friar is going to send out a message to Romeo that this death is fake, and that when, these 42 hours pass, they will come find her in this vault when she will wake up as if nothing happened, and he will be able to take her away. And the way the message will get delivered is explained here. He says, I'll send a friar with speed to Mantua with my letters to thy lord. And that friar is Friar John. Basically one of his, friar friends, I guess you could call it, will rely on him to send the message out to Romeo.